Well, hey, Dicefest 2025. Thank you for coming to our feature panel. Today, we're so excited. Our guests of honor are Gorden and Nancy Frye. I could spend the next hour just talking about how awesome they are because I truly feel this. They are from another time period, as far as I can tell. If anyone I know could be a time traveler for real, it would be them. And I think oftentimes I play the mind game of if I were thrust back into a previous time period, say the Old West, say a Shadows of Brimstone sort of thing. Could I survive? What skills would I have that could keep me alive? And I've pretty much decided I'd be in trouble. But these guys, I mean, you name it. They could shoot horses or, ranch or be, U.S. Marshals or like any of it. I can't imagine. You might do better in an Old West time period. I don't know, but anyway, so I'm so excited to have them. I'm going to read some bios of them to explain a little bit who they are, and then we'll jump right in with the presentation. And to be clear, this is our feature panel. It's called Shadows of Brimstone, Weapons and Gear of the Old West. And we even have some show and tell here. These are actual hundreds of years old antique weapons from the Old West. So let's see. All right. So Gorden Frye studied historical weapons of all sorts from a very early age and spent many years reenacting various eras. He has a master's degree in Western history and was an adjunct professor of history for Navy College in Bremerton, Washington. When not speaking at conferences, he continues to research the 16th, 19th, and 20th centuries. He occasionally consults in the film and TV industry as a cavalry specialist and military consultant. His film credits include The Postman, Ride with the Devil, The Alamo, and The Patriot. And he's got stories from all of these movies, and it's amazing. He presently lives in Kingston, Washington, with his wife and two bossy cats. I don't know the names.
Rigel and Ari.
Rigel and
Ari.
Ari. Okay, we needed to know that. I needed to know that for some reason.
That's all right.
All right, Nancy or Neb, with a BA in drama from the University of Washington, Nancy Frye hit the ground running at graduation, working in costume shops at the UW, Seattle Opera, and others. While driving a wagon at a Civil War reenactment, she met her future husband, who introduced her to the wacky world of film and television work. This led to stints as a wrangler, background cavalry actor, and assistant armorer on various films, attending various writers' conferences as AV geek for her historian husband. She caught the writing bug. Her first published short story appeared in Space Cowboys 5, Cattle Drive from Raconteur Press. She does the occasional voiceover for radio plays and commercials when she's not writing or in the woods looking for Sasquatch. Have you found Sasquatch yet?
Just one footprint.
Okay. He was hopping that day, apparently.
It was big.
All right, so without further ado, let's have a round of applause for Gorden and Nancy Frye.
You first.
And we are also live streaming this to YouTube. So for our folks at home, thanks for joining us. And you can leave questions in the comments, and we'll get to. You can do a question and answer period at the end. So we'll take questions from the home audience, and then of course questions from people that are. I leave it to you guys.
Thank you.
Well, hello there. I'm Gorden, obviously. Nancy. One of the things we're going to talk about, you adjust that up. They're never tall enough. We're going to talk about, obviously, the firearms.
Get right up
and
on
some
it.
of the gear. But Shadows of Brimstone, it always strikes me as it's taking place in New Mexico. And one of the interesting things about New Mexico is that prior to Mexican independence in 1821, New Mexico, the province of New Mexico, which had been founded in 1598, okay, and Santa Fe was founded in 1610, it was the absolute bug scuffle end of the Spanish
pop
Empire.
filters
And it was
or
very, very poor.
mittens to go over the microphone.
However, and Spain
Gordon
kept it
is
that way
Mr.
because they didn't
Plosive.
want any interaction with other countries, like England or the United States or whatever, to trade other than going through the proper channels, meaning Veracruz for Mexico, what's now Mexico. With Mexican independence, that changed. And there was an American trader, he was traded with the Indians, with the Comanches, and he was out on the plains and he ran into a Mexican cavalry patrol. And he was afraid he was going to be arrested. And they said, no, 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 no. Will you bring all this stuff that you're going to trade to the Indians to Santa Fe and sell it? I said, okay. And when he got back to Missouri, okay, to what's now Kansas City, and he had a bunch of mules carrying silver, and he sliced open one of the leather bags of silver, and all these silver Spanish dollars poured out. And I said, oh, there's money to be made here. So the Santa Fe trade was born, and New Mexico went from being one of basically the poorest province in in New Spain, in what's now Mexico, to one of the richest, because they were the doorway, the gateway to the United States, because it was cheaper to send stuff from New England or England up the Mississippi, up the Missouri, across the plains to New Mexico, to Santa Fe, and then down into Mexico than it was to go through all the customs that you had to pay, the tariffs, if you will, that you had to pay by going through Veracruz. So anyway, so that's where we are right now. They still had a lot of old stuff, but New Mexico was becoming a little more, they were becoming richer. And so they could get some of the more new stuff. So let's start off with whatever it is I had on the first slide. The shotgun. So one of the most versatile weapons anywhere is a shotgun. And originally, of course, these were muzzle loaders. You had to, stuff all the powder and shot and whatnot down the front of the barrel, and then you had either a flintlock or, in this case, a cap lock to set it off. They were very versatile because you could load whatever you wanted for that particular shot. Today, a shotgun is still a very versatile weapon. You can use birdshot, buckshot, slugs, whatever. It's not too accurate, but at 100 yards, I don't want to stand anywhere near where they're shooting. So, one of the interesting things about technology is when it first advances, it looks just like the old stuff. Whether it's a car, looks like the old horseless carriages, literally looked like carriages, or firearms, or ships, anything. You get new technology, people are used to what the old stuff looked like, so that's what they want. So this doesn't look much different from a cap and ball shotgun, but it's not. This is actually made by Colt, the guys that made the revolvers. It's a 10 gauge. And I want to show you what a 10 gauge shell looks like. This is nice and empty. I can look right through it. Anyway, they're big. 10 gauge was more popular than 12 gauge because black powder hit harder, whatnot. But like I said, it looks and acts just like the original cap locks because you've got your hammers. Oh, mild technique, so next time you're using a double barrel shotgun, the front trigger fires the right side, the back trigger fires the left side. Just one of those little things just in case, you're fighting zombies and you don't want to shoot off both at the same time or something. Don't do that. At any rate, this one was made in 1883. They were extremely popular, not just the Colts, but all shotguns. But what's funny about, this is the newfangled one, what's funny about the cap lock shotguns is they actually lasted a long time in the West. Remember my grandfather, who was born in 1895, telling me about when he was a little bitty kid in the Cimarron Strip in Oklahoma. That was where they had the big land rush and whatnot. And his father had two guns. He had a cartridge revolver and a muzzle loading shotgun. Because it was you loaded it for that particular day, for that shot. So it was still very versatile. And so this would have been 1899 or 1900, and you're still using them. So all this stuff, all this old technology keeps on being used until it's worn out. Alrighty, next please. Ah, my favorite. So on the Texas frontier, one of the big problems that the Texans had moving westward out onto the plains was Comanches. It's called the Comancheria by the Spaniards and the Mexicans, the Comancheria. And that's where the Comanche tribe, they were the lords of the plains. They ruled it. They drove the Apaches off the plains, okay? We always think of the Apaches as being real tough guys. The Comanches drove them off the plains. So in fact, the teepee is probably an Apache development. Anyway, the Comanches were at home on a horse. It was said that a Texan or an American would ride a horse until it was tired. A Mexican could ride another 50 miles on that horse. A Comanche could get on that horse, ride it another 100 miles, and then eat it. Okay. Anyway, what the Comanches would do is they were absolutely phenomenal horse archers. And this is a thing that in Europe and Asia, North Africa, horse archers were the big deal. In fact, most knights in anywhere other than Western Europe, knights were horse archers. And these Comanches were absolutely phenomenal at it. They had their little short composite bows in which they could actually drive an arrow through a buffalo. They'd ride up next to the buffalo, galloping along. And believe me, it's exciting riding near large horned creatures, okay, that don't like you. And these guys were doing this bareback, and they were riding up there, and they're firing arrows. And they could do this in combat as well, and they could fire 6, 8, 10 arrows at, say, a Texas Ranger, before he could do anything other than fire his 1 or maybe 2 or 3 shots, because each of the muzzle-loading firearms he had was 1 shot. He might have a rifle or shotgun, maybe he's got 2 there, 2 shots, and then a pair of pistols on his saddle. After he's done with those, he's got to reload them. Comanche's still shooting arrows at him and turning him into a pincushion. However, in 1836, a guy named Sam Colt, whose company made that shotgun, he developed the revolver, the modern handgun as we knew it. Now they're past that, but there's still a revolver. They make them today. Very efficient handgun. Multi-shot. The originals made in Paterson, New Jersey, and called Patterson Colts, were little 36 caliber, about a 38. Kind of a pop gun by modern standards, but still powerful enough to kill a person. And it had 5 shots. The Texas Navy bought a bunch of them, 180, something like that, and used them in a battle against Mexico, the Republic of Texas. And this is funny because it's the only battle in which a sailing navy beat a steam-powered navy. But the Republic of Texas disbanded their navy, and the Texas Rangers managed to grab these revolvers that were no longer being used. And they got into a fight with the Comanches, 15 Texas Rangers against 100 Comanches. And rather than ending up with their scalps hanging off the Comanches' bridles, they survived and won. The Comanches were very disappointed in this and disgusted. The Texans were, needless to say, exultant. They had found the key to that lock of mounted combat, and that was the revolver. New technology. Well, Sam Colt went out of business before that happened. But in 1846, in 1845, the United States annexed Texas into the United States, and Texans raised regiments to fight in the now Mexican-American War, because Mexico is still considered Texas part of Mexico, and so there were issues and ended up in a war. But one of the troopers one of the Rangers who'd been with Jack Hayes, who was the captain of these Texas Rangers at Walker Creek, a guy named Samuel Walker, he was lucky enough to have a Oh, his brother was a senator from Maryland, so it's nice to have contacts. Anyway, he went to Colt and said, I need some more of these guns because now I'm a captain in the new regiment of mounted rifles in the United States Army. I need revolvers. Colt said, I'm out of business. Well, get back in business. I'll help you redesign this to a bigger and better gun. And this was it. This is the Walker Colt, model 1847. It's a brute. This is almost 5 pounds of love. And 9.5-inch barrel. You load it by putting your powder and a ball. Oh, thank you. Actually, on this side. And half cock. That's your ramrod. You ram it down. And then 6 of those, then you put the caps on the back. And you've got 6 shots. It took the same charge as the United States rifle of the time, which is a 60-grain charge of powder. Smaller bullet, but the same powder charge. These things shot magnificently. They were designed to go through a Comanche war shield or to drop a horse. It's one thing the U.S. Army always liked big bore revolvers, big bore handguns, because you might have to drop somebody else's horse or even your own. Anyway, this got the ball rolling for Colt. And they never went out of business after that, after 1847. You can see all the tools that were issued with it. There's a nipple wrench, flask, the mold, a gang mold for multiple pistols, and original holster. Anyway, next, sir. Oh yeah, you may have seen somebody using these Walker Colts in a kind of a cool movie. Josie Wales. All right, next. These are actual original photographs of men with Walker Colts. And what's really, really cool, I've actually held those photographs in my hands. The one nearest me is a guy named Rip Ford. They called him Rip Ford because he was the adjutant of the Texas Mounted Rifles, and he always had to write letters that said, rest in peace, because he's writing to the relatives of the guys that got killed. Anyways, rest in peace, Ford. And the other 2 guys, Texans, but they look like they're dressed up like Californios. So it's going to be, this is like immediately after the Mexican-American War. So like maybe 1850 at latest. And these are daguerreotypes. Next. They started shortening them up into dragoon revolvers because these were just a little bit too big and a little too powerful. So they made Colt, working with the Ordnance Department, made them a little bit smaller, but they're still huge. Next. Okay, now we get to the Navy Colt, which was a really popular gun. It's 36 caliber, 38. The bore was actually 38. And now the bores are actually 36, and they call them 38s. Okay. But the 1851 Navy Colt was called the Navy Colt. Colt wanted it to be the new model Ranger revolver. But remember I said there was a battle between the Texas Navy and the Mexican Navy? The Battle of Campeche in May of 1843. And he said, I'm going to celebrate this and thank the Texas Navy for keeping me in business for a while. And so he had this engraving on the cylinder of this revolver. And so everybody thought, oh, this must be a Navy gun because it shows ships on the side of it. So it's a Navy Colt, even though the Army Colt has the same thing. Never mind. These are the favorite revolvers of guys like Wild Bill Hickok, otherwise known as Duck Bill Hickok. That was his real name. But anyway, and guys used these not only in the 1850s and 60s in the Civil War, but well into up till the 1890s, because they're just an efficient, handy weapon. And it works. I already own it. Why should I buy a new gun just because it shoots some newfangled kind of ammunition? Next, sir. This is the holsters. It's called a Slim Jim holster, is an original type. The original holsters were very form-fitting, very, very lithe. A lot of them were developed in California during the gold rush, because that's where revolvers, sort of got mass distribution. It was the California Gold Rush, because what sold for $25 from Colt's factory in Massachusetts sold for $150 in the gold fields of California. So there was it's sort of like a vacuum cleaner sucking up all the new firearms. And next. This is an Adams revolver of 1851. It's British. Now, the British had a different way of looking at handguns than we did. First off, most of these handguns, most of the revolvers that the British used were private purchase for officers. They didn't really issue very many handguns to enlisted personnel. And when they did, they were usually a single-shot pistol. In fact, the British were still issuing single-shot muzzle-loading pistols to sergeants, buglers, and lancers to 1877. The French were even way ahead of them. What can you say? The Russians were ahead of them. What can you say? Anyway, they were big bore. They're like a 50 caliber, but not a lot of powder. We preferred slightly smaller bore with a lot of powder for a lot of velocity. They wanted a bigger bore with not much velocity so that it expended all of its energy in a fairly narrow target, shall we say. We wanted to drop a horse, they just wanted to drop a man. And something like the Walker or the other Army-sized revolvers, they would drop a horse. The Navy, maybe not drop a horse, but it certainly would shoot 100 yards with no problem. British one, no, but they wanted to drop the guy right now. And so that tradition continued well into the 20th century. Oh, just an example of a double action. What the Americans were using, you had to cock each and every shot like that. The double action that the British were using, you could do that. So it's a lot faster when you're dealing with multiple assailants. And in the British colonial service, they would often have multiple assailants with spears and swords and things like that. They were going to cut you down and do evil things to your body. And so they preferred to have these large bore, short range weapons. Next.
There it is.
There we go. Remember I said something about how the technology may change, but the form doesn't. And this is just a double barrel pistol. It's in one of the earliest of the self-contained cartridges. The word cartridge actually comes from the original paper cartridges. They were just like, everybody's seen a penny roll, a roll of coins. Well, instead of coins in there, think of a lead ball and a bunch of gunpowder and twist it at the end. That's a paper cartridge. The self-contained cartridges were certainly much more weather resistant, but also a lot easier to load because you're loading them from the back instead of having to upend your firearm to stuff it in the front, which can be pretty awkward. Soldiers with a lot of enthusiasm and a sergeant with a big stick could get up to like 4 rounds a minute in a smoothbore musket. But that's with a lot of enthusiasm. If you have a rifle, something that takes a little more time, you're lucky to get one in a minute or so. So these self-contained cartridges were a huge benefit. And this is one of the first ones, and the French adopted these in the 1850s. They had revolvers in the 1850s using these self-contained cartridges, way ahead of everybody else. Next. So Colt updated his big Dragoon Army-sized revolvers in 1860 with something that actually had the same frame as the Navy Colt, but was bigger, and it had this rebated cylinder. So it took a .44 caliber ball, but still had the same handling qualities as the Navy Colt. And these were extremely popular. The Navy Colt was made between 1851 and 1873 or so, and they made like 200,000 of them. In the time 1860 to 1873, they made 200,000 of these, quite a few. Colt's big competitor at the time was Remington. And of course, Colt and Remington are still around. but they made what's called a solid frame revolver, like the British Adams revolver was, which meant it was a lot stronger, maybe a little harder to make, but it was a lot stronger because you can see there's this little wedge here that holds the barrel on to this arbor, which is what the cylinder revolves around. Not real strong. It's a good system for what it is, but if you want to increase the strength, it's not a great system. But it's still, you know, got to ram it down, the powder and ball charge down, and cap it. But these were extremely popular in the Civil War, North and South. Of course, most of the production went to the North, and then the South acquired them through various means. But they were an extremely popular gun. And again, these guys lasted in holsters in the West well into the 1890s. Ain't broke, don't fix. You know, if you already own it. And one of the things we don't really think about too much is a lot of the people in the Wild West were pretty poor. And, you know, you had one suit of clothes. If you were lucky, you had two. You had your Sunday go-to-meeting clothes, and then you had your work clothes. Working cowboys, you know, they got $30 a month and found, which was a lot of money, but they usually blew it on stuff at the end of the month on activities. Or the trail hands, when they got to Dodge City or Abilene or whatever, they blew most of their money. Like sailors. Anyway, single men in barracks do not make plaster saints. Okay, next please. So Sharps Rifle Manufacturing Company, Christian Sharps, they started making a breech-loading cap-lock firearm in 1848. This one here is called a slant breech. You can tell because it's slanted. Later on, they started making them just straight up and down. And these were, again, pretty popular. The United States Army bought a lot of them for cavalry use because you got to think about how if you're on horseback using a carbine, it's really awkward to have to load it from the muzzle. Now, they did have a long bar on one side with a ring and a carbine sling to hold it all together, but it's still awkward. And if you can have a breech loader, that makes, that's the short little ring. It makes a lot of sense. Now, it's kind of an interesting little aside. So any of you guys involved in mountaineering or anything, you've seen a carabiner, you know, a little snap hook? Yeah, from a carbine. That's the snap hook they used to hold your carbine to your belt, which was strapped across your body. Pretty cool. Anyway, Sharps, they made a lot of carbines for the United States Army during the Civil War, and they converted quite nicely to cartridge when those started coming out. Next, please. Smith & Wesson, another familiar name in firearms history. They're the ones who actually developed the .22 cartridge. It's rimfire, which means that all the priming compound is in the rim of the cartridge at the very back. And 22 short. You can still buy the darn cartridges, 22 short. And they made a little revolver to go with it. It was bored through cylinder, which a guy named Roland White had patented. They bought the patent and kept Colt from copying them, Colt and everybody else. But they made these 22 revolvers, which weirdly, guys carried in the Civil War as personal protection. We generally don't think of a 22 as being all that hot, especially not a 22 short, but as one old mountain man said when he was talking to an Army officer that had one, he said, "Let me see that little thing." Wow, if somebody was to shoot me with that and I was to ever find out, I'd be pretty mad. Okay, next, please. Okay. Smith & Wesson also developed the lever-action rifle. They worked for an outfit called Volcanic Arms Company, and they made this not very good little lever-action firearm. that shot what was called a rocket ball. It was self-contained, but all it was a bullet with a hollow base and some priming in the back. So your firing pin hit that and set it off, and it wasn't very good. But a guy named Oliver Winchester bought all the stock when it went belly up. And he hired a guy named Benjamin Tyler Henry, to work on that. And Henry took Smith & Wesson's other idea of a rimfire cartridge, made it into a .44, upgraded it, and turned it into the Henry rifle, a .44 Henry rifle model of 1860. Now this is an 1873 model, which interior-wise is identical. It just shot a much more powerful cartridge. But use your lever, and there's a little thing called a elevator right there, which literally elevates the cartridge from the magazine tube up into proximity of the chamber. This is part of the firing mechanism in the bolt, and it pushes that cartridge in, and then it's also the firing pin, boom. You pull the trigger, it goes boom. Now the original Henry, you loaded it from the front of the magazine tube, which was awkward to say the least. I have shot them, we have one, and shooting it, and all of a sudden you don't get any cartridges because the thumb piece on the follower for your magazine catches on your hand, and you're wearing a glove because it gets hot because there's no forend, no wood forend, and you're wondering, how come I'm not getting any more bullets? Oh, pull your hand down, ka-chung. That's why. Anyway, in 1866, they upgraded from that to this basic design, except it was still a brass frame. Anyway, I'll get onto that. But Henry's biggest competitor at the time was a guy named Christopher Spencer, who made the Spencer rifle. If you've seen Unforgiven, you've seen that rifle. And its its magazine was in the buttstock, which was something that was tried off and on over the years, but people generally get a little hesitant when you have all kinds of cartridges right next to your face. This makes people uncomfortable. But that was far more popular during the Civil War, was the Spencer carbine. It's a big 56 caliber cartridge. And it was a thumper, but didn't have a lot of range. When things moved to the West, you had greater range in the .44 Henry, which was really about the same power as like a modern .45 automatic cartridge. Not a lot of power, but still a lot better, a lot more distance range than the Spencer had. But at any rate, they made a lot of them. Next one, please. Okay, there you see, a Henry rifle, and it's a Silverado, and then Unforgiven with the Spencer. Next. And that's how they operate. And then the patent drawing, of course, for the Henry. Okay, next, sir. And this is the model 1866, which was the upgraded Henry rifle, and it had King's patent loading gate, which meant you could actually load it from the back instead of having to turn it upside down and drop. And they could also put
This right here.
put a forend on it. And these sold for, I think it was $25 for the carbine and $40 for the rifle. There's a lot of money in those days. But Carroll Quigley, who's an eminent historian of the last century, he pointed out that there were no revolutions in the United States between the Civil War and now, because your average working guy could afford the best firearms in the world. And so nobody's going to try to put their thumb down on you because they know they could get shot doing it. So Carroll Quigley, who actually Bill Clinton said was a huge influence on him, obviously not good enough, but still, Quigley is a very renowned historian, and that was a very astute thing for him to say. You could still afford the very best weapons in the world. Next, please. Well, there's a Sharps in action. A couple photographs of that. They were used heavily in the Buffalo massacre, the buffalo hide trade of the late 1860s through the early 1880s. When they, with government encouragement, basically wiped out the buffalo on the plains, which, as the Army said, well, it takes away the Indians' commissary. They have nothing to eat. They got to come in and get fed. The reason they could do that, though, is because the German chemists had developed a way to actually tan buffalo leather chemically to make it useful. So if you ever see old, like pre-World War I European military leather goods, most of them are buffalo. Most of that stuff's made out of buffalo. Weird stuff. Next. And there's a famous guy with his buffalo rifle. Also, Sharps continue upgraded their stuff. As an aside, while I'm talking about Sharps, I'm going to jump forward a little bit. So one of the guys who worked for Sharps was a fellow by the name of boy, I'll get it in a minute. It's one of these asides that doesn't really matter. Anyway, a German engineer worked for Sharps, and he helped a fellow by the name of James Paris Lee develop a bolt-action magazine rifle, U.S. caliber .45-70 for the United States Navy, which adopted that in 1879. And Borchardt, Hugo Borchardt, that was his name. And Borchardt helped develop this. He went back to Germany, and in 1893, he developed a pistol with a toggle, and the toggle was exactly like the toggle inside a Winchester. And it took a magazine in the butt of it, just like the Lee box magazine, detachable box magazine. And although the Borchardt wasn't real popular, one of his students, one of his engineers, was a guy named Georg Luger, who then took that and ran with it. So it's kind of, there's a lot of interesting cross-pollinations going on here. Next. Okay. I'll come back to this. So what I was talking about with how people tend to like the old forms with the new, even with the new technology. Well, in the end of the Civil War, the self-contained cartridge was definitely a thing. In the course of that 4 years, these rimfire and now early centerfire cartridges were becoming obviously the wave of the future, and guys standing there literally having to stand up and load their musket. Well, in 1864 and 66 in Germany, the Austro-Prussian War, and then the Danish-Prussian War, the Austro-Prussian War, and then the Franco-Prussian War of 1871. The Prussians, the Germans, showed the world that, you know, you can have a sort of a half-baked rifle that doesn't have a lot of range and stuff, but if your guys can lay down on the ground and load and fire rapidly, you can beat the tar out of the guys that have to stand there, because they're standing there. They're big targets. And so everybody goes, oh, that's a good idea. And of course, you know, we had learned that in the Civil War as well. But what we learned and what the Europeans think is useful is, you know, two different things. At any rate, the United States Army Ordnance Department had thousands, hundreds of thousands of perfectly good muzzle-loading rifles that were now obsolete. And so they started trying to find ways, how can we convert these to use modern cartridges? And the way they finally went with was this, what's called a trapdoor, because it looks like a trapdoor. You still have your hammer like the muzzleloader does. Everything's very much like a muzzleloader, except this part where you can drop in your self-contained metal cartridge. Now we use brass. In those days, they were using copper. There was a problem with the copper. First off, it's really soft. It does expand well and what they call obturate, so the the gases don't come back in your face. But the problem with copper is that it corrodes really quickly. And guys would have cartridges in their belts. Guys like, guys in the 7th Cavalry had cartridges in their belts, and the tanning process of the day was very corrosive. If you're riding in the rain, you got this corrosive leather holding your cartridges that you're not taking out and cleaning every day, and you get this green stuff on there called verdigris or verdigris. You put that in your rifle or carbine and fire it, it welds that thing right in there. That cartridge ain't coming out. And you're trying your best, and eventually, because that brass is soft, a little thing called the extractor, you can hear, that's supposed to send that cartridge right over your shoulder. Doesn't do that, cuts right through the copper rim, and you yank it hard. So there were a lot of Custer's men who were found with a knife out, trying to scrape this cartridge out unsuccessfully. And so they've got a revolver still, but the rifle, and they're trying to get that going. And anyway, they ended up dead. This is actually a model of 1877 carbine, which is exactly like the 673, which Custer's guys had, except there's a little trap door on the butt. I don't have one in it, but it holds a cleaning kit. A little ramrod that's segmented. So if you do get your cartridge stuck, you can pull out your little cleaning kit and knock it out. Sadly, we had the same problem in Vietnam with the early M16s. They weren't chrome-lined barrels, and they were in this nasty, humid climate. And a lot of guys were found with their cleaning kit out, trying to knock a cartridge out because it ripped, because the Army decided to use a different powder than the rifle was designed for, and it was really dirty, and it was a self-cleaning gun. And I mean, it's never just one thing that leads to disasters. Next, please. Okay. Now for the Winchester. And by the way, this is a much more powerful cartridge than the Winchester uses, which is why the Army went with it, because you could have, it'll shoot 1,000 yards. You're probably not going to hit much, but it'll still do it. Winchester, 400. They sold it as a 600-yard gun. Yeah, well, what they sell it as and what it'll do are two different things. Anyway, that's more of a pistol cartridge. This is definitely a rifle cartridge. And they're still using 45-70 ammunition, the rifles, not single shots, but lever action. That's still one of the most popular firearms in Alaska, because they have large furry woodland creatures that need a lot of oomph to drop. '73 seems to have been a big year for firearms. Anyway, that was 1873 carbine. This is 1873 Winchester. And again, it's in an upgraded cartridge. It's no longer the rimfire. It's a new, they called it 44 because that's what the Henry rifle shot. The Winchester 66 shot was a 44. It's actually .427 cartridge diameter. So it's really a 43, but they call it a 44. Again, just like a 357 is a 38 and a 38. At any rate, very, very popular gun. They made these up until 1928, from 1873 to 1928. Really popular. When these came out, they dropped the price of the Winchester 66 down to $20 for the rifle. These were now the $40 rifles. And they made them in all kinds of, basically whatever add-ons you wanted. They're engraved. a semi-pistol grip. They had shotgun butt, whatever you wanted. Most of them were octagon. This is a round barrel, because actually a round barrel is more accurate than octagon, but octagon looks cooler. But they were very, very popular. A friend of mine has a rifle in what's called 3840, which is another weird, it's actually a 38, that's actually a 40 caliber, but they call it 38. Never mind. But it was bobbed down to carbine length, 24 inches down to 20 inches. Well, why did they do that? Why did somebody do that? Well, they already owned the gun. They wanted a carbine. Why go out and spend money on a carbine when you can just whack this one down and you've got a carbine? People were a lot more thrifty in those days. Next, sir. Conversions. Okay. So I talked about the cap and ball revolvers. Well, they wanted a way to convert those into the brand new fangled cartridges. They don't look a whole lot different. But still the same action, but it now has a little loading gate in which you can stick your 38 caliber cartridge in. This one's a Navy. And if you get it lined up right, oh yeah, this thing pops your cartridge out. Your little loading lever, that loading, pardon me, ejection rod. And that's why what this tube is for. It holds a spring-loaded ejection rod in there. And a lot of guys, they had a cap and ball revolver. I want the newfangled one. Well, you could have a gunsmith convert it over to cartridge. They put basically a little donut in the back, hog off the back end of the cylinder where the nipples or cones would go, and then, okay, now you've got a cartridge gun. Next, please. There's a couple of fine fellows, one of whom definitely has a cartridge conversion revolver. Next. Little double Derringer. Oh, I forgot to bring that one. Oh, well. Anyway, Remington made these little double Derringers starting in 1868, and they continued into the 30s, 1936 or 7. And there were 41 rimfire, and they were nasty. Belly guns. If you watched stuff like, cool westerns when you were a kid, like Have Gun Will Travel or whatever, they always have one of these as their hideout. When I was a kid. When you were a kid, you guys were kids, you probably were watching Star Trek and stuff. But anyway, I watched westerns. At any rate, my grandmother had one of these. She was teaching out on what's it called, the Carrizo Plains in California, near between San Luis Obispo and Bakersfield, up middle of nowhere in 1915. And she had to kill a rattlesnake with a stick of wood from the woodpile in the one-room schoolhouse she was teaching in. And so her boyfriend at the time, not my grandfather, before them, anyway, he gave her this little Derringer to carry. So I had a pistol packing grandma. Anyway, pretty cool. Next. The British were also in on the whole thing. They had upgraded their double action revolvers, both made by Webley and by Adams, and they went into the cartridge business, and they were actually very popular in the United States. They were called a British Bulldog, because again, they were more of a belly gun. You didn't carry one in a big old holster. You put it in your pocket or inside your waistband or something like that. In fact, a way to carry a pistol with one of these in your pants is you take the loading gate and stick it out so that it doesn't go sliding down your pants, because it's really awkward when your pants are your pistol's somewhere down there. Anyway, all right, next. And now we're in usually about 44 caliber, 38 or 44. Next. Smith & Wesson. Smith & Wesson upgraded in 1869 or so to this big break open cartridge revolver. Went straight from a little 32 or 22s and 32s to this big 44, the 44 American. Some of the cool guys like Buffalo Bill, and also Wild Bill Hickok, he carried one for a while. They were packing these, and there was a Russian prince, Prince Alexis, Archduke Alexis. He decided he wanted to go on safari in the far west, go buffalo hunting and stuff, and so he put together this retinue, which included Buffalo Bill and Wild Bill Hickok and a bunch of other guys, Texas Jack, Omohundro, and most of them were carrying these Smith & Wessons. This was 1870, and this prince, this Grand Duke, was so impressed, he decided the Russian army needed these. And so they did. The Russian ordnance was, they liked them, but there were some improvements they wanted to do. Like the cartridge, the 44 American cartridge was not quite that advanced. So the Russians redesigned it into what was called the 44 Russian cartridge. It went from, like if you've seen a 22, you've got the grease grooves on the outside, that they're not covered by the brass. And that's what the 44 American one was. And it's, it gets kind of grubby. You put all kinds of nasty stuff into your bore when you're shooting it. And the Russian cartridge enclosed that. And it went from a 44 down to a 429 cartridge. So Winchester was 427, 44. Smith & Wesson was a 429. The 429 cartridge, that's exactly what a 44 Magnum is today. And that cartridge, that 44 Russian cartridge, the same exact base, that is the great-grandparent of the 44 Magnum cartridge. You can shoot a 44 Russian in a 44 Magnum. Same thing. It just 44 Magnum is longer and a lot more powerful. It luckily doesn't go the other way around, so you don't end up with parts all over the place. But anyway, yeah, the Russians. How much time do we have? I'll tell you about a rabbit trail later about the United States and the Russian Empire between 1860 and 1944. How's that? Anyway, next. Now we get into the Colt Single Action Army. So here's the Colt Army, 1860. Here's a conversion. And this was what it ended up in as the 1873 Colt Single Action Army. Standard cowboy gun. 45 caliber. The Army wanted it in 45 because that was first off what their 45-70 was going to take. They wanted the same caliber. Took a 40 grain charge, and literally you could kill a horse with it. Back in the 1890s, when the Army was going over to a 38 double action revolver for most of the troops, the artillery kept these. They trimmed the barrels, but they kept these. Why? Because artillery, horse-drawn artillery, has all these horses, and if one gets wounded and is thrashing, you have to kill it right now. The 38 wouldn't do it. That would. That'd do it. So it's very, very popular. They got their. This one actually has this cool little us mark on the side. It says us. And almost all of the famous gunfighters had these same exact guns that are marked us. Why? Because Colt couldn't make enough. They were still trying to fill all these government contracts when it came out, and they didn't start selling them on the civilian market until around 1875 or 76. But these guys wanted them. Well, soldiers had a tendency to decide to decamp and end their contract unofficially, and they usually brought stuff with them to sell so they could buy civilian clothing. And so most of these gunfighters, whether it was Jesse James or heck, name one, Wyatt Earp, Doc Holliday, all these guys, they had stolen Army pistols, all of them. And the guns are still around, and they, oh yeah, this was his. They didn't sell that on the open market. It's got a US stamp. Anyway, very popular. But they weren't totally ubiquitous. There was a lot of people carrying a lot of other guns. which is something to remember for, gaming and stuff. A lot of other guns were out there. But the reason we think that this is the only gun that anybody ever carried was because the Army was selling a bunch of these cut down ones, the artillery model. In the 1920s and 30s, they were selling them off surplus. And guess who bought them all? The movie industry. Places like Western Costume and whatnot. They bought these things, and that's what they had. So that's what they gave the guys playing cowboys, was these, marked us, in fact. And when somebody finally figured out, hey, wait a minute, we have a lot of money involved in these things, let's start selling them on the collector market instead of beating them up. Anyway, yeah, it's kind of interesting. And this one was either stolen or in a militia, like New York State militia or something like that, because all the ones that were in Army inventories in the 1890s got cut down. So the other one I have one of the artillery ones, and it was made in 1880. This was made in 1885. So the older one is the newer one. Anyway, 10 minutes. Okay. Okay. Wait, I've got a holster. Next, please. Remington also made their version. Basically the exact same thing. It's just had this web there because the Remington cap and ball revolver had that web for their loading lever, and they wanted to keep that look. They were the first ones, though, to make their revolver in .44 Winchester. So there were several guys who bought these things and liked them a lot, one of which was a guy by the name of Frederick Burnham. He's born in Minnesota, raised in Southern California, became an Arizona cowboy, ran off to Africa because he always wanted to be an explorer in Africa. And a good friend of his, Baden Powell, said, wow, you're the coolest guy ever. You're a scout. I'm going to organize a bunch of kids to emulate you. Boy Scouts. So that's the Boy Scout pistol because he carried with his Winchester. So Fred Burnham carried with his Winchester his Remington .44. And I actually know a descendant of his, which is pretty cool. Guy's a big-time long-range shooter, which is pretty reasonable to be. Next. Okay, another Winchester. This is 1876. Same exact design as the 73 and the 66 and whatnot, just bigger. These things are huge. But they were adopted by the Northwest Mounted Police. And Charlie Russell, who was a famous Western artist, he wrote, the Northwest Mounted Police, now the Royal Canadian, now Northwest Mounted Police, they were the only North American cavalry to ride Western saddles and carry Winchester rifles. So, yeah, pretty cool. Oh, and Teddy Roosevelt packed one too, of course, so that makes it, that much better. Next. And there they are. Next. Yeah, somebody else has one of those movies. Next. And now you get into double actions, which is the 1889 Colt Navy revolver. As a standard swing-out cylinder, .38 caliber revolver, which is fundamentally no different from what you can go into a store and buy today in .38 or .357 Magnum. Same thing. Came out in 1889. And in fact, we had one, I worked in a gun store too, and a guy brought one in. It was his great-great-grandfather's. His kids wanted nothing to do with it, which was really sad. But, wow, that's a cool gun. That's in great shape. That was your great-great-grandfather's? Oh my God. Anyway, neat guns. And they made lever-action shotguns too. That's one of the first Browning designs, St. John Browning. A big old lever action with a tube magazine. Next. Yeah, you've probably seen that movie. Just spin it right and you got it. And next. And that's the 1895 Winchester rifle. They made them in hot cartridges like the 38-40 Krag and 30-06 and 303 British, things like that. Modern smokeless ammo. Next. Big medicine for lions and tigers, according to Teddy Roosevelt. That's Kermit shooting a tiger, I guess, a lion rather. Or is that a leopard? I can't see from here. Leopard, okay, there we go. Next. And these even made it to the Wild West. This is a Mauser Model 1896. Shot a 30 cal, very high velocity, 30 caliber bullet. That with a magazine in front, a box magazine in front. He hadn't caught on to the fact that Borchardt had the detachable magazine. Anyway, popular, obviously guys carried these in the Wild West. And there should be a picture of somebody else with one of these. Next. Oh, there's more. Oh yeah, Sherlock Holmes. Oh, and by the way, in that Sherlock Holmes movie where they got those things, they go snap, click on the magazine, bottom of the magazine, make bottom. Oh well, nobody knows. Next. Ta-da! And now we're off into the modern world. All right, that should be the end. Next. Oh my God, keep going. Cowboy stuff. That was the end, okay. So that was a guy named Pink, something or another, who was a gunfighter in the late 19th century or late 20th century. Okay, so I got a couple of minutes here for questions.
Yeah, generally speaking, when a cowboy goes into a store to buy ammunition for whatever gun he has, were there a variety of ammunition types or different loads that you could choose from, or was it you got one kind of bullet for whatever gun you had?
No, there were different loads. Winchester, when they were an ammunition manufacturer too, their load for the 45 Colt was a 255 grain bullet with 38 grains of powder. The Remington load was a 250 grain bullet with 40 grains of powder. So you did have some choices there. There generally there wasn't a whole lot of variation, but at least but you did have a few choices.
And one more. There's a very famous scene in True Grit where John Wayne has a big trigger guard and he flips his rifle around. Is that historically accurate? Is that just the movies?
Okay.
So he was asking about the scene in True Grit where he's flip cocking the rifle. Was that done?
Is that real?
I don't think so. It's cool. I have a little carbine you can do that with. It's really fun, but in my experience, it tends to throw the cartridge out when you're doing it. It's like, this isn't very efficient. So it's Hollywood. I think it started off with John Wayne in Stagecoach, where he's got that same exact gun doing that. Any other questions? Sir?
So you talk about the design theory of, built to take down a horse, built to take down a rider. Do you happen to know the design theory around the LeMat?
So design theory behind the LeMat.
But take down everything. Yeah, the original LeMat revolver, designed by a doctor from New Orleans, manufactured in France, and carried by a lot of Confederate officers, generals especially. It's a 10 shot, I think it's 10 shot, 40 caliber revolver, cap and ball revolver, but it's the arbor around which the cylinder revolves is a shotgun tube, a 20 gauge shotgun. And so by cocking, when you cock it, there's a little piece could be brought down, which would hit the primer or for the shotgun. So you could shoot 10 40 caliber shots against people, and then you could give them a load of buckshot.
It's a big cylinder. Any firefight fans? James' big old honking revolver is basically a tricked out prop type LeMat. And he's a big guy, so he can pack some like it's bigger than this. They are huge. And yeah, they have a shotgun. You can catch one shot.
Yeah, They're very cool, but, sir.
I think Scott mentioned you do a lot about 19th and 20th century, but I also hear 16th century in there too?
Correct.
So the question is about 19th and 20th versus 16th century.
What do you want to know?
What's your history or what?
Oh, I did a lot of research into, and testing it out, research into 16th century cavalry, using, because the transition between the lance to the pistol really fascinates me. And so I've got wheel-lock pistols, and I had a beautiful big, my horse at the time was this beautiful big Charger. He was half-quarter horse, quarter Percheron, quarter Belgian, big boy. And I have armor, and so I'd charge around testing things, and I had a bunch of friends who'd come over and we'd charge around and also play with guys with pikes and muskets. And so, yeah, had matchlocks. Nice thing about a wheel lock is you can pull it out and go boom. He has to go boom. But you can also shoot a lot more times because you're on horseback and you got a couple pistols, that's about it. Anyway, yeah, I've done all that crazy stuff, and if you want to catch me in the hallway, I'm happy to talk about it. Any other questions, sir?
So you brought a number of examples here that are real historical firearms. Do any of them have a storied history? Anything?
So all these historical pieces that you brought, do any of them have interest in history that you haven't already brought?
Not that I'm aware of.
Like the individual gun.
Yeah, the individual gun.
This actually belonged to my family, or this one I got in a certain.
Sadly, no. Well, let's see. So there's an actual photograph of, or two photographs, daguerreotypes of Samuel Walker, the guy who helped Colt redevelop the revolver. And I owned this at the time when a friend of mine owned these. I think he still has them, a guy named John McWilliams. And so I had them breathe the same air. Okay, I know that's really autistic and weird, but you know, it was cool. And the ones that if you will go out and buy a copy of these, this is actually made a remake by Colt itself. They come with a blued cylinder. Well, the originals had unblued cylinders, so of course I have to have one that's not blued. So again, my firearm autism coming out.
Does anybody else, when you watch a movie, or your spouse, do you both know with them? If you're watching Star Wars, you gotta have a lightsaber, your toy lightsaber, or something like that. You're watching Lord of the Rings, and you've got your version of skin, or whatever. If we watch a historical film, whether it's 16th century up to the 20th century, he has to have the matching gun in his lap to watch the movie.
Not always. If it's the third or fourth time, I don't. Yeah. Okay. I cop to it. Yes, sir.
To go with that story, are you judging how the guns are used while you've got it in your lap? In movies?
Well, yeah. Sometimes it's like I wouldn't do that. You can't do that with that. How many shots does that thing have in it? You know, like wow, it's one of those magical Hollywood guns that shoots 20 times before you reload it.
The biggest pet peeve of any gun person watching a cowboy movie or an old west movie is guys
Fanning.
stupid thing. It's the dumbest thing. You can't aim with this thing.
It's a quick way to unload it, but past that.
Not only that, depending on how the grooving is done on the ham, on the prop, you're gonna tear up the gun in your hands.
It's sort of like full automatic fire. It's a good way to turn money into noise.
But are you saying that was not historically, that never happened?
It did. It did happen, and people and most of the people who witnessed it were contemptuous of the guy who used it. Like, when the hell would you do that? That was stupid. You could have just, well, what? Yeah.
It was never effective.
I wouldn't say never, but not very. How's that?
Not recommended.
Yeah, because anyway, one of the gunfighters, I'll think of him in a second. He said, Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. And you want to go as fast as you can, but still under full control. And those guys aimed. Those guys aimed at each other. And it's interesting that these Colt revolvers, all of them are sighted in for, basically, if you aim at a man's belly button at any range, you're going to hit him between here and 100 yards. Here's another neat little thing, speaking of that, because anyway, you're either going to hit him in the nose or lower. But Rudyard Kipling went on a tour of the United States, and of course he liked soldiers, so he'd go and review the cavalrymen whenever he ran into them. And he was talking to these cavalrymen, about half of them who had already served in the service of the Queen. But they're saying, well, what would you do if you came up against a troop of the Queen's dragoons or something? And they'd say, well, first off, we'd ride into the woods, we'd dismount, and then we'd shoot them. So you wouldn't draw sabers? Hell no. Anything between me and 100 yards, or between my revolver and 100 yards, is dead. And he's like, you shoot revolvers up to 100 yards? Well, yeah. And that just absolutely shocked him. Then that these Americans thought, well, this 45 caliber revolver, you can hit a man at 100 yards, no problem. And it's true, you can do it, no problem.
You referenced that earlier when you talked about it being a British thing, where a handgun, they would basically reach out and touch someone. Close quarters.
Close. This is model 1899. Oh yeah, they stole the Smith & Wesson stuff too, by the way. That's how that Smith & Wesson works, in case I forgot. Ow. Anyway, so the British were into short range, because they were used to shooting guys who were on foot with swords, like in India or South Africa, things like that, with spears and swords. And the Americans were used to shooting at people with, on horseback, who were moving fast and could move towards you rapidly. And so range was very important to Americans. And it's just a whole different thing. One thing to keep in mind, and this is for just present day stuff, colonial wars, militaries are unfit for pursuing colonial wars, and colonial wars ruin armies for peer wars. Let's keep that in mind. Any other questions?
When you were talking about the Russian 44, it had an extra flare off the trigger guard. What was the purpose of that?
The question is about that little flare off the trigger guard on the Russian.
Is for accuracy, stability. The 44 Russian cartridge wasn't super long range. I was looking at some loading data from the 1930s, and they were showing 44 Russian ammunition and the 44 Special, which you can still get, and it's identical. The ballistics were identical. And the only reason they made 44 Special a little longer is so that you wouldn't put a modern smokeless load in one of these old revolvers and blow it to smithereens. But
that's a good point. The old style powder, black powder, little pile of black powder. The modern powder that's in all modern firearms is called smokeless powder, even though there's a little smoke, but it's not like black powder. It's so much of a faster ignition that if you put the modern smokeless powder in an antique firearm, it just goes down.
interestingly, chemically they're the same. Black powder is made up of charcoal, saltpeter, which is potassium nitrate, and sulfur. Smokeless powder is made up of basically cotton, they use cotton, with nitric acid and sulfuric acid. Same basic composition. The difference is black powder is a low explosive. Smokeless powder is an accelerant. It's just that it burns a whole hell of a lot faster than black powder explodes. And so your pressure curve is like that instead of a curve that goes like that with black powder. So even though if your gun will take it, up until 1885, firearms were not made out of steel. They were made out of iron. In 1885, the United States Navy decided they were going to build iron ships or steel ships, and to replace the wooden ones they were still using that had been made in the Civil War. This is 1885. This is 20 years later. And so they said, well, if we make them out of steel, that'd be better. Well, we don't make that much steel. We have to buy it from England. No, if we ordered in steel, they will make the steel. Carnegie and these other guys will build plants because we're going to order a hell of a lot of steel. And so because they started making steel in huge quantities, Winchester and Colt and these other gun manufacturers started making their frames and whatnot out of steel instead of soft iron. So the modern powder will, if nothing else, stretch the old iron frames of these guns and make them unserviceable. But yeah, that's a very interesting little tidbit about industry and how industry changes and the different technologies and what drives what, that's another rabbit hole we can go delve down. Any other questions before we wrap things up? Sir. You there. Which one? Let's see. Okay, stories from our movie careers.
Speaking of powders and explosions and smoke, when you're in a movie, you're going to know where this is going. When you're in a movie and it's World War I and you're in the trenches or whatever, bombs raining, big poofs of smoke and fire going up in the air. Those are welded pots that are sort of trapezoidal. They're set down in the ground, and then they put a charge under it, and then they pile some folders or junk, whatever they want, picturesque, that's going to go up in the air, and then they run a wire, and then when it's go time, they push a button, and the thing explodes. And it doesn't make a boom, it just goes whoosh, and the stuff goes up in the air. It's still a lot of smoke and a lot of dust. And if they're setting off multiple runs of these, and you're riding your horse through it, all of a sudden you can't see where you're going. You can't see where all the little extras are that are supposed to be riding through, and it can get very exciting. And they did that for the Battle of
Calpin. No, it was the earlier one.
in the movie The Patriot, the Mel Gibson
Guilford Courthouse, yeah.
There's a scene in there where the bad guys, the green dragoons.
I'll take it over. Okay, so I was in command of the British cavalry in the movie The Patriot, the Mel Gibson movie The Patriot. So all the British cav guys, I got to raise, organize, train, lead these guys into combat. Anyway, they wouldn't even give me a lieutenant's shoulder strap. I was annoyed. But at any rate, there was a scene where right after Mel Gibson and what's his name, the kid, Keith Ledger, are having their conversation. You look out a window and there's this charge, there's this battle going on. And so we had a stuntman portraying Tavington, who's supposed to be Bannister Tarleton, anyway, Tavington, leading this charge and doing it when, in the script, he's basically doing this when he's not supposed to, because he's stealing the thunder of the general. Anyway, he's leading the charge. We start charging, and we're supposed to charge between this hole in a hedge, which they put in, and there's supposed to be some pots going off long before we get there. And so we start our charge, and he's in front of me, I'm next, and I've got my bugler and my guide on, got the flag next to me. We're in a column of threes, 3 abreast, and then a column back. We charge, and whoever was doing the pyro set these things off at a bad time because it went right in the face of this guy's horse, the stuntman's horse. Boom. His horse goes that way. Boom. And so all of a sudden I'm in front. We keep going, and they blow up another couple of these things, so we're blind. We're still going. The horses know what they're doing, but I can't see anything. And so the next thing I do, and I finally managed to see something out of my eyes, is...
They miscued the foot soldiers.
Oh, yeah.
That's the problem.
Oh, yeah.
The soldiers are supposed to come out after and queue before.
Right, we're supposed to go in ahead of the redcoat infantry. Well, they miscued them, and instead of going in front of us, we went right through them. And so if you've ever read about cavalry charges hitting infantry, unorganized infantry, it's really ugly because first thing I saw when I opened my eyes was this red coat in front of me going boom underneath, my horse slowing a little bit, and then knocking another couple of guys over as we all charged through.
And all these guys have bayonets and their muskets and they're going around and the horses are charging through.
So we're using our swords to parry these muskets because we're in a charge, right? We're not slowing down. Nothing's slowing. There's 30 guys behind me. Anyway, we're parrying swords, parrying these things. Anyway, and so we're charging through there. And I'm like, oh my God, did I kill that guy that I ran over? He's one of the guys I helped train as infantry earlier. And so I go riding back. And the first thing he says is your horse okay? I think so. Oh, and so he goes and finds his hat. His tricorn hat has a big horse print. Boom, it is flattened. So yeah, it is interesting because guys move pretty quick when they get hit by a horse. Boom, they bounce. So, there's a little bit of veritas in the movie industry as you get to try out stuff like that.
Actual combat.
Yeah, we didn't shoot anybody, but we sure as hell knocked them. Yeah. Okay, there's a story for you. Are you happy? Yay! All right. Anything else?
What's your favorite tall tale about firearms history or firearms industry?
Boy, that's a good one. I try to avoid them. There's millions of them, I'm sure. Stuff about basically wonder weapons. It was like the Gatling gun was developed so that it would make war so horrible no one would want to engage in it. Kind of like nuclear weapons. But machine guns, the same thing. There was a thing called the Puckle gun of 1718, which was kind of a big revolving cannon, where it looks kind of like a Gatling gun. But anyway, this thing was developed in 1817. The guy said, this will make war so horrible, no one will ever want to engage in it. But it even came with square bullets against Turks. And it's just one of those things a lot of, inventors with their heads up in the clouds think, oh, I know how to make peace. I'll make a weapon really horrible. And every time we try it, all it does is make war more horrible. So there's that. I don't know. Somebody else had a question? Is that it?
If you're interested in hearing Gordon talk about cool stuff like this, we have a podcast. It's called The History Files. We haven't recorded a new episode in a long time, but I've been re-airing the older ones that are still pertinent. And you can find the website is there on the screen. You can find Gordon on Twitter, where I make him put things up because he won't use them. But the Substack is where you can find him talking about all the cool stuff.
Sir.
I think you can, as I put them onto Substack, I think they end up on Spotify. I'm not sure, but if you look for the History Files, that's a good question. I don't know.
Did that scene that you described with the horse charge, did that make it into the movie?
Oh, yeah.
Part of it did.
Okay.
Part of it. The first part did, not the part where we were running over our own troops. They cut that out. Yeah, maybe that's not the best way. Because what they wanted to do is they wanted to just film the battle. They just wanted the battle to go organically, and they'd film it. And they decided, boy, that didn't work because there's just too darn much smoke and dust. Because nobody could see anything, especially me, because my eyes were full of this peat dirt that they blew up, and moss that they blew up into the sky.
I'll tell you one last thing. Gordon's a good horseman. He takes care of his men. And any Jason Isaacs fans in here? So he plays the bad guy in the picture. He's wonderful. I don't know if it was at the end of that day when you were shooting some stuff, and it was another chaotic battle scene day. And he came to Gordon and said, "Thank you so much for taking such good care of me." Leave me over.
Yeah, I got a little poster of Bannister Tarleton that he signed for me and said, "Thanks for making me look good." Anyway, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. All right.
Thank you guys so much for coming out. And they're going to stick around for a little bit if you guys want to see the items and ask further questions and get more information. Also, right now, I have exclusive promo cards just for this event for you guys and stickers for this panel. So come right up here and
Forget how big
those
these
out.
are. I always forget how